Welcome to my new channel, Sauce Code, where I am going to be uploading Blender tutorials on a regular basis. In this video, I just wanted to lay some foundation so that I know everybody's on the same page as far as Blender. So let's open Blender, and you have your default scene. This is what you see when you open Blender for the first time. And I know it's kind of daunting, all the buttons and options. I've been using it for a while, so it all seems kind of like I'm very comfortable with it, but I know that I can remember the first time I opened Blender. It looked a lot different than this. It was a different version, but it was just a mess, a nightmare. I thought I'd never learn it. Let's take a look at some of the other 3D application user interfaces. This is Cinema 4D, and this is 3ds Max, and this is Maya. Those are the three top 3D design programs. They each cost a fortune, but you'll notice with each of them there are a ton of options and things that I personally don't know what they are, but you know, there's no simple interface for 3D design. So the good news is you don't have to learn all this stuff. You don't need to. This whole toolbar, we're not even going to go over this because it's not important. So we'll press T to hide that, and I'm gonna walk you through. I think first off, I'm just going to describe in this video what some of these buttons are. I'm not even going to go into how to manipulate objects. Let's get started. The views, you've got three options right here, as well as these options up here, which are useful as well. If you wanted to add an object, you can do it through this add menu, and there's a bunch of different options: lights, cameras, mesh objects. Mesh objects are things like this cube. This is a light, and this is a camera. Now, a major difference in Blender that is pretty unique is that everything is selected by right-clicking. And you'll notice that when I select these things, that over here things change. And some things in here will change because you get more options or less options with various objects that are selected. When I select the camera, you get a camera thing here. When I select an object, you get a lot more options in this button menu right here. This is your properties window. Pretty much every change that you can make to an object will happen in here. And if you happen to be using Blender cycles render, this will look different. And I'll do another separate tutorial for cycles. But this is just Blender render. This thing up here that keeps changing is your overview, and it's a list of all your objects and their properties. It's very handy for when you've got lots of things in your scene and it's hard to keep track of them all, so you can go up here and just look for them. So we've got this view thing here. Now with 3ds Max you usually have a quad view, and you can toggle that, and it's a very good setup for modeling. I typically don't use it very often. Turn that off. Let's see here, view. You can align your view to separate things, and I'll go over the hotkeys later, but like your left view, your right view, top view, front view. Let's see, top view, where was it? Right here. The rest of the stuff you don't really, it's not all that important. Camera view. Oh, oops. Camera. Whoops. Camera view. Whatever's inside this camera view, this dotted box, will be what renders. And rendering is sort of like a developing film. Old cameras. Select you know, I'm not sure that that's even necessary to go over right now. It's a little more advanced. Your object has got lots of options in here, and a lot of this is a little more advanced than you need to know as well. So you can select an object. Don't even worry about them right now. This thing right here is the mode. Now there's several different options here But all that's really important is object mode and edit mode. The rest, we'll go over at a later date. What we're in right now is object mode. You can tell the difference between object mode and edit mode because object mode will look different, obviously. Let's go to edit mode, and you can see the vertices now, and you can edit them. But you can see that you can edit it, and then you can go back into object mode right here, and you've got an edited thing. Alright, so got that. What is this thing? Now this is the viewport shading. You can switch between a lot of different things. Bounding box, it's not so important, you won't use that very often. Wireframe, it's like it only shows you the edges of your mesh, which is real useful for if you have several objects. Like, let's put a sphere in there. Now if I'm in solid view, you can't even see the sphere, but you can toggle it by going to wireframe mode, and there's hotkeys for all this, but I'm not even going to go over that because it'll make the video way too long, and I'd rather you just know what a lot of this stuff is, the important stuff, before we go into how to speed up your workflow. So now we've got two objects. We've got a cube and we've got a sphere, and you'll notice that here is the cube, and you can left click up here to select them. These two things at the top, don't worry about that. Okay, yeah, don't worry about this pivot point, it's not important, just leave it alone for now. This is your manipulator, and I think it may only be viewable. I'm not certain why. Oh, it's because we had nothing selected. Oops. Whenever you select an object, you'll get this manipulator. When it has arrows, it's to move, and you just left click and you can move it along that axis, whatever. You know, just like a lot of other programs. You can switch to rotate, and then just click one of these guys here to rotate, and this all works in edit mode too. If I go to edit mode and see we have a vertex here, we select 2, then we can, you know, rotate that. This is where your pivot would come into play. You can change your pivot to maybe active element, which is the last thing you select. Like if I select this, shift select this, that becomes the pivot, and you can I'm sure you can imagine how that would be useful. But normally it stays on median point, which is the middle of any vertices or objects you have selected. Okay. This is the scale manipulator. It's got little cubes on it, depending on which one you want to do. And all these scaling operations can be made very precisely by going up here and clicking and dragging this, or pressing in to bring up the in menu, is what I call it. And you go up here and you'll notice that it's got let's go to object mode, make it a little simpler. This is for the entire object. Now all this is all off because we've been moving it around, but say you wanted to, the scale is all set to 1. If you wanted to scale it along X, you see how it's moving? Or you could type in a specific number. That way you can keep all your objects to scale and make very fine adjustments. So we've got that. You can press N to make that go away. Okay, so don't too much worry about this local and global. We'll go over that at another time too. That's just too much to get into right now. These are your layers. If you click any of this, everything just goes blank because all the layers are blank at the moment. and you'll see that only the first one has something in it. So got that. What is this thing? I'm not even sure what this is. I've never used it, but I'll look it up sometime and tell you. So it must not be that important. Yeah, at least not for beginners. This is the proportional editing thingamabob, scientific term there. If you go into edit mode and turn this on, now if you, we don't have very many vertices, but G is to grab the hotkey. You see how I can make it bigger, and now it moves like funny because it's got an area of effect. So that is your proportional editing. You can change the type of fall off, and you really don't see. Let me make it. You know what? Let's go back in here, press X to delete that, X to delete that, and put a plane in. And we'll press S to scale that. If you can remember all these hotkeys as I say them, that's perfectly fine. Go in here and I'll subdivide this a bunch, and don't worry about what all that is at the moment, but just to show you what proportional editing will do. There we go. Oops, I guess I gotta turn this down a little bit. Alright, I'll grab one Z. You see how it's affecting more or less vertices? And this will also work in object mode if you have lots of objects. See, and this is useful for, you know, making mountains or hills or making organic type changes to a mesh. So turn that, disable that. This is your snapping. Let me add another object. Let's add a cube. Grab this along Z. Say I want to snap that directly to the edge of this line right here. You turn this on. When it's colored, you'll know it's lit, and choose edge. Alright, now grab it along Y, and you see the little circle that pops up? That is telling it where to snap. Now I know it looks like it's not on top of this, but it is. If you rotate, you'll see. You see now it's perfectly in line with the edge of this. So you can imagine how that is useful. You can snap things to any number of edges, vertices, faces, volume, and increments. Increments being the grid spacing. So now we've gotten all through that. This is call this backface culling, I believe. Oh no, wait. Oops. Let's turn that off. That's over here, which allows you to see through objects right here. Even though we're not in wireframe mode, in solid mode you can't see the faces that are behind an object. But if you click this, you can. And I don't use this very often, though I did when I was just starting. I find that it is better for me to just press Z when I need to get behind an object. You know, I can still work on edges that are not, you know, that are behind faces. So that's pretty much all this. This is your render. You can render if you're in wireframe mode. It'll look like that. And if I press Z and do it, then it looks like that. Actually, this is not just render. This is OpenGL render. So it renders whatever you see in the viewport. That's pretty cool. I've never actually used that. And this would be for OpenGL rendering of animations. This is your timeline when you do animations, which I'm not even going to go into right now, but this is how you skip frames ahead and stuff like that. This is the frame you start on, the frame you end on, the frame you are on. These are all animation option whatevers. Okay, that's all we're going to go for over here. And this is your 3D view, if I didn't mention that. A very helpful thing is this little guy down here, which will tell you, even though if you have this covered up, these lines, where your axes are. Because it's really easy to get turned around and forget which way is up, which way is down. But this was always there to help you. Alright. Now, let's go over here. This is the overview. I already went through that, so it's not important. The eyeball, the arrow, and this. I'm not sure what this arrow does. I guess it's not important for what we're doing because I don't know what it does. This will toggle visibility of objects, like it's the plane. We can click that over in edit mode. If we click that, the plane disappears, and I know there's a box with the plane that's disappearing, but it's because we were in edit mode and we added the box, the cube. It's still a plane, and as far as the naming is concerned. Let's see. Okay, that's enough for that right there. This is your properties menu. All this stuff right here. And it's got lots of options. The main ones that we'll focus on for at least the next couple tutorials, or at least the next one, is the materials and the render settings. You click any one of these to change the below options. Click on the camera for render, and these are your render presets and settings. This is your resolution. Everything is labeled. If you hover over anything, it'll give you a hint as to what the thing does, like border, render user-defined border region, which we won't go into right now. But like, what does anti-aliasing do? Hover over here, combine multiple samples per pixel to prevent jagged edges. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff can be figured out just by hovering. And Blender's come a long ways. When it first came out, it was not nearly as user-friendly as this, and a lot of people used the old, what was it, 4 point something. I forget. I even forget the number. And they 2.4. And they got a bad taste in their mouth about Blender, and they will never try it again. And they'll tell you to their dying day that it's a piece of crap. But it's changed a lot. It's gotten so much better. So we've got all of our options here, and these are mostly not necessary. You don't really have to get into these. Main one is the render. Oh, not there. The dimensions and the output. And this thing right down here will allow you to choose what type of image or video file you want, PNG or JPEG. I usually do JPEG unless I'm trying to make something look as good as possible, and then I use PNG because it just, I don't know, personal preference. Turn the compression to 0. It makes a much larger image, but it's technically better. There's even better things like OpenEXR. I've never used this, but it makes enormous picture files. They're like 60 megs a piece, but it preserves every 1 and every 0 of information. Nothing is lost. So that's that. So let's go to materials. This is, for now, just think of this as what color your object is. You can change the color, and it's a lot more than color. It's like the properties of the material that makes up the object. But for now, I just wanted to do a quick tutorial. I don't want this tutorial to drag on where people are like, that's just too much to process. So I wanted to make it simple. We'll dig into each thing later and really get to know everything. But right now, I think that is a good starter for Blender, the user interface. I'll be uploading another video very soon, like in the next day, probably tomorrow, going into more depth on how to manipulate objects and the quick keys. So thanks for watching. Subscribe and like for more videos.